From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Hello everyone, hopefully you've had a wonderful weekend. Happy Mother's Day. More details about that in a moment, but I hope everyone got spoiled. If not, 3 hours left on the East Coast to get something from Macca's? I don't know. Now, one thing that of course was beautiful to see, well, a lot of people couldn't because of rain in big parts of the country, but if you were lucky enough to be able to see the Aurora Australis, well, you've been able to have the photo of a lifetime. This is something that came from Tasmania, where it was absolutely spectacular last night, I believe. A little further up north in the country, it'll be better tonight. If you've got photos, send them to me, paul@skynews.com.au. This is the view from Victoria as well. Absolutely stunning, the lighthouse stuff. Just a special expression of what Mother Nature can produce every now and then. In Kangaroo Island, in Queensland as well, you name them, all the photos are there. Now, like a lot of people, I have been enjoying the photos and going, geez, that's pretty amazing. So what actually is going on that produced such beautiful skylines over the past couple of nights?
The phenomenon occurs when electrically charged particles from solar winds enter the Earth's atmosphere and interact with gases. The event hits the entire planet at the same time, but the tilt of the Earth at your location and the weather conditions will determine just what types of colours and movement you see.
I definitely knew that. Thank you, Nicola. If you got those great photos, keep them coming through, paul@skynews.com.au. So, OK, Mother's Day. For obvious reasons, to all of the beautiful mothers in my life, thank you so much to my beautiful mum, Judith as she's officially known, of course, who taught me about the values that I've put together in my life, the work ethic, all the rest of it. I love her very much, and she's always so supportive of what I do, her husband Wayne as well. To my beautiful wife, Sian, this is the greatest job I will ever have. It truly is the greatest job, and it's the job I dreamed of, and it's the job that I, hopefully, will be here for a long time to do. But it does come at a cost to our family. I don't get to tuck the kids in at night, and I'm not much of a chat in the mornings. And may I just say publicly, what many a dad has probably written in a card, but to the mums who take on all that extra because of the job that dad does, thank you. Specifically to my wife, of course. Our kids are amazing, and it's all because of her. All the bad stuff, Dad. And his penchant for, let's watch fail videos, kids. Not the greatest way to bring up future awesome little Australians, but my wife balances it all out, and I love her so much. So all the best to all the mums that are watching us, all the mums around the country who are so wonderfully loyal to this program. Now, in Forbes today, there was a gathering of people who decided to honour a mum who is no longer here, a mother who, of course, was murdered. Now, as we know, Molly was murdered a couple of weeks ago. The person police believe responsible for that, what we now say is alleged crime, is, of course, currently behind bars, but there's the whole conversation about bail and all of that that's happened before. But I want to say thank you to the people of Forbes, because they used their Mother's Day to go for a walk, and they did so in their hundreds. And they did so specifically to keep Molly's name in the headlines, and it worked. This thing was covered all over the news today, and well done to every person who took part of that in Forbes. They did exactly the right thing. And the family spokesperson says these events are necessary to keep visible Molly's name and the demand that what failed her does not fail other women.
Magistrates really need to think of the victims instead of the perpetrators. And we just need to keep their names alive, because if we be quiet, they'll stop listening.
Now, of course, there was an opportunity for our government to take what happened to Molly seriously, to follow what the people of Forbes were walking for today and what common sense made very clear. When National Cabinet met to discuss domestic violence, they should have really only concluded one urgent and automatic thing. And by the way, remember those $5,000 payments? Well, I read some fine print on those. That was the big headline that came out of that meeting. Well, those don't kick in until not this, but next financial year, like 15 months away. So what should have happened was that just like when John Howard after Port Arthur, you get all the states together, you find one piece of legislation, you could make it 1 page long, and all it says is that if somebody has form, they have zero, none, duck egg, bugger all chance of bail. Now, sadly, that didn't happen at the federal level, but it is happening in Molly's home state of New South Wales. I want to commend the Minns government, who tomorrow will announce in greater detail just that. The idea that bail will now not be available to lowlifes who have committed domestic violence offences in the past. Chris Minns will make the announcement formally and properly tomorrow, but I just wanted to say well done to the New South Wales government for actually doing so and putting that law in place. And just finally, you know that there's a cause that I care about deeply, and that is making sure that sick little bubbers are able to make it through their first few days on this planet. Now, sadly, for that to happen in many places around the country, they need equipment donated to the kids' version of intensive care. The charity that does that is the Dumpty Foundation, and as you know, last year we got together and we raised an awful lot of money for the good people of Mildura to make sure that they would be able to have parents and kids who could stay together in that area to make it through the first few days. If something got more serious, yes, they'd go somewhere else, but more equipment in more locations means that more babies will survive. That's deeply important to me for the obvious reasons about the loss of our little man Leo way too many years ago, but of course it feels like just 30 seconds ago. So tonight, for Mother's Day, again, maybe you have forgotten the gift, or maybe you think the gift that you ended up unwrapping today wasn't that amazing. Well, you know what you could do? If you do have any loose money around, and I get it, it's tough, but please go to humptydumpty.org.au, humptydumpty.org.au, because tonight they are running a fundraiser to make sure that mums around the country will have more medical equipment to take care of what they need to keep the little people alive so they become the future of our country. Please, humptydumpty.org.au. Big, beautiful cause, big, beautiful people, and I love them very much. Now, by the way, across this weekend, your gift is going to be matched dollar for dollar by all the people who are the corporate supporters. All of it is tax deductible over the amount of $2. So please do your bit for them if you can. I know I ask you so often for help with things, but this audience reacts so beautifully all the time. humptydumpty.org.au is the way to get in touch with the Humpty Dumpty Foundation. Now, there's going to be a fire hose of BS that is going to be coming our way from Canberra, even more so than usual, because the federal budget is just but a couple of sleeps away. I know, who cares? But the reality is that it is being printed, it has been printed, it is in the possession of all of the people in Parliament House who need it. It'll be formally released to a whole bunch of reporters that get locked up so they get the government spin, and they all come out and, funnily enough, say exactly the same thing. Thankfully, we will be watching it in real time. We'll learn about the budget, go inside and out for you, and 9:30 in a 90-minute special edition of Paul Murray Live on Tuesday night, I'll pull it apart for you. I'll tell the 5 things that you need to know. We'll call out the BS. We'll see the games that are being played. But every treasurer loves the budget because it really is their moment in the sun, as a way of sort of reminding us that there are other people than the Prime Minister who could run the country. And Jim Chalmers was out there with all the family photos. Oh, here I am, just naturally picking up some flowers for Mother's Day. A few days ago, there was photographers brought into the family home because I'm a dad just like you. And again, unlike the left, I'm not going to be a nasty bugger. Of course he loves his kids. Of course he loves his family. Of course he loves his wife. But that has been the pre-budget look at me going into the budget. But of course, at the heart of this budget is going to be a failure to deliver on what they promised to deliver on, and that is to actually do something about cost of living. Yet it doesn't stop them saying it. In all of the pre-hype interviews, many of which took place on all the different types of TV stations' Sunday news shows, oh, there's definitely going to be help when it comes to cost of living.
Cost of living really is the biggest priority in the budget. We know that you're under the pump, we know you're under pressure, and we're trying to help where we can in the most responsible way.
You know, we've done this for months, we've done it for years. We know that that's not true. Now, yes, this budget will formally put in place the changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts, which, remember, if you're earning just $45,000, it's $15 a week. And even the best spin that everyone can put on the numbers, if this moves this way and this moves that way, it's going to be what? $39 a week in extra help. Now, that extra help is, of course, not money that the government produces. They just turn around and say things like, you'll be able to keep $39 a week. Now, yes, when you add it all up together, you can push it as close to $2,000 as you want, but that's not how the system works. Of course, when you pay your tax, you pay it weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever your pay cycle is. So you're not going to notice that change. But I've got to say, well done to one group in the media who didn't just let Jim Chalmers get away with just the sales job, the look at me, I'm so good, I'm the guy next door, I could be your future Prime Minister, all of that rubbish. And it was SBS. Now, SBS actually did a report a couple of days ago about just how many people are struggling in the Queensland town of Gladstone, that of course we've done our town in not that long ago. And Anna Henderson, who works for SBS, decided to play to the Treasurer some of the things that had been in that report. Now, this is part of it, and it is a bloke who now lives in a car near the river because his rent went up too high and he just could not afford it. Here he is, and this was what was shown to the Treasurer.
The rent's gone from $180 a week to $320. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but $320 is pretty much my ceiling. People need to be able to breathe and think about more than just budgeting for every tiny little thing.
So the Treasurer was shown what that bloke is going through. It's an example of the person we've talked about so many times for the most obvious of reasons, because not only do we care, but we also have to make sure that we send the message to the people who are watching us right now in their taxpayer-funded accommodation in Canberra, you've got to do something about it. You don't just yap about it, you've got to do something about it. Now, the Treasurer's response to that piece of footage was, of course, to point to the billions of dollars which will go into social housing over the next 10 years. But that bloke's living by a river tonight. But it was the following comments which, to me, showed how the Treasurer has no interest in actually doing something, because he may well have been shown a video of a classic car somebody was fixing up. There was no emotional response. This, in fact, is what he said. We would need to always do better, and we can do better. There will be billions of dollars in relief and assistance for people who are under the pump, in addition to a tax cut for every taxpayer. That's it. Just sell. Not, I understand, I'm going to call that bloke, I'm going to work out what we can... None of that. It just was an inconvenient little bump on the road of self-promotion in the lead up to a budget, which will, of course, make everything look rosy. Everything that they give to you is, of course, largely done either with borrowed money or with higher taxation. But again, the details about the number of people who are looking to something from the government who will get nothing from the government and will not wake up any better. Now, they'll say, oh, there's a tax cut. There's $39 a week. Now, I understand when you're looking at that across the Australian population, it's billions and billions of dollars. But you've got to divide it by the number of people that are working and divide that by the 52 weeks, and you actually see how little it is. So while everyone will focus on the big number, I'm going to focus on the number that you will be doing in your head to work out whether anything has actually happened, whether the needle has moved at all. And people need it. My bombshell buddy, Liz Tilley, writing in the Courier Mail today, talks about how there's 1 million people in Queensland, 1 million households in Queensland that are in financial stress. Now, I've also been banging on for some time that this government is in a position to cut petrol taxes. It'd cost the exact same money about the changes they've made to make sure that some people won't have to pay slightly higher uni fees. $3 billion. He's going to have a surplus. And remember, if the surplus is anything over $3 billion, then he's got the room to move, but he won't move. In fact, he's even telling us on television he won't move on a tax that his government doubled since they came to office and now is 49 cents per litre.
You know, we think there are other ways to provide that cost of living help, and we've got $107 billion in tax cuts flowing in the coming years from July already, and that will provide that average tax cut of $36 a week in addition to the other cost of living help that we are providing.
No. Honestly, think about the bloke living by the river right now. The bloke living by the river in his car. If he uses his car, he needs to pay for it with petrol. The family that are dropping their kids off at childcare. The bloke who's driving the van. The woman who is going from job to job to job as a hairdresser, they all use their cars. This is an opportunity to lessen the pressure. But for some pig-headed reason, they won't do it. And perhaps it's because it is the source of revenue to them. It's billions of dollars of revenue to them. And if you're actually honest about the upcoming budget and its apparent surplus, you can bring it down to petrol taxes, alcohol taxes, cigarette taxes. All of that takes you way past $20 billion in revenue. So without that, we would be in deficit, which is why he won't cut it. So despite the fact that they'll bang on about it and talk all the time constantly about the cost of living and the focus of it and the reason why, the reality is they could pull a lever, but they choose not to because it helps them have a budget surplus, which gives them the opportunity to go to an election and say, how good are we? Interesting poll today has found that 77% of voters don't think that the federal budget will deliver on cost of living at all. So they want to have it both ways. They want to talk it up like they're doing it, because I'm the guy next door and the flowers and the family and all that stuff. But when he's actually in a position to do something that would help the person who's living in their car or the guy who's homeless and sleeps in his car by the river, he won't do it. Because they need the gold star of a surplus rather than actually doing anything to help people like that bloke. Extraordinary. Meantime, more polls are bad news for the Labor Party, particularly bad news for the Prime Minister, seen here in his male model efforts in 2022 when he said, I'm just as at home in a pub as I am in a boardroom. Oh, please. 27% of Labor voters have apparently walked away from the Labor Party since the last election. Now, if that actually bears out at an election, then obviously you're talking about a potential change of government, not just minority government, which is where it is going to go most likely. The new poll shows that the federal government has lost confidence of a large chunk of voters that carried it into office. And remember, only just, they got a 2-seat majority in 22 in a sign of a fickle electorate. No, it's a sign of an electorate that doesn't like being lied to. Lied to by a bloke who promised he was going to do something about cost of living, but it all gets worse. And then they turn around and tell you that $36 a week for the average taxpayer is going to be enough to change anyone's lives. It's all well and good if you've got a car paid for by the taxpayer and a fuel card paid for by the taxpayer. Of course, the numbers, 8% have gone to the Greens, so the government's not left-wing enough. 8% has gone to the coalition. 8% is now undecided. And remember, in the undecideds, in many other polls, they eventually start breaking away from the government. Once you've broken up with them, it's very hard to win them back. We'll see whether the BS that comes out on Tuesday will actually achieve any of that. 3%, by the way, has gone off to small parties and One Nation. Yet again, looking at what we've talked about before, a little growth at the moment in One Nation at the moment. It always seems to happen mid-survey, but we'll see what happens when it comes to a full election. We'll talk to James Ashby and a whole bunch of others in a No Sooks, No Lefties Mother's Day edition here. Meantime, the polling about the leaders themselves. Australians would rather have a beer or a meal with Anthony Albanese, but Peter Dutton would be the person who'd be there to pick up to put up a shelf. So if you want something done, Dutton. If you just want to get the feels, you hang out with Albo. In a more serious finding, though, inside this thing, they spoke to 2,000 voters and words like weak, liar and useless come up as the most frequent about the Prime Minister. For Peter Dutton, it's strong, but then arrogant, boring and untrustworthy. Now, there were some pretty nasty games that were played over the weekend around an issue which you and I can see as clearly as it is, but the federal government has now tried to put detail on the table to make sure that tomorrow they will not be asked questions about the failures of how they dealt with the people who were never refugees, who should have never stayed in the country, but they stayed in the country because they were constantly appealing inside the system. Many of these people had serious criminal records and were not supposed to be back out on the street, but they ended up back out on the street because the High Court ruled that somebody who was a previous sex offender had a right to not be indefinitely detained. You know the story. You also know that the most egregious example of this is a bloke who was supposed to be wearing an ankle bracelet, but he wasn't. He's a bloke who is alleged to have been involved in the bashing of that Western Australian grandmother, the Western Australian grandmother who the Prime Minister, by the way, even though he was in Perth last week, couldn't be bothered picking up the phone, let alone going to her house.
I'm not currently scheduled to visit Nanette Simons. Well, my heart goes out to Nanette Simons.
But the Canberra Press Gallery thought, the issue has now been neutralised, because the claim is that another person who is alleged to have taken part in that assault had been released from detention in 2020, and that means it's all Peter Dutton's fault. Now, of course, without getting into too many obvious details because the court process is playing out, we're talking about two very different people and two people who were released for two very different reasons. But for those who are trying to desperately shift this issue away from one that Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill and the Prime Minister need to answer questions about, they're, well, taking the stick to this one. Court records show that this person was charged with a string of offences after the coalition government released him from detention in 2020. What did he do? He was fined for drug possession and driving under the influence of illicit drugs. Now, neither of those are acceptable crimes. But if they want to turn around and pretend that that's the same as some of the people who were let out under the Labor Party's watch, people who did not end up with, and apparently less than half of the people who came out of detention at the end of last year are currently wearing ankle bracelets, good luck. But of course, Labor now says, Peter Dutton, Peter Dutton, Peter Dutton, and most of the media will run that way and think he's the problem.
It's up to Peter Dutton to explain how this occurred, why this occurred, and to reconcile the statements that have been made by Shadow Minister Patterson and Shadow Minister Tehan and Peter Dutton himself, how the statements that they've made this week can be reconciled with this fact.
Seriously? Anyway, they'll have their go in question time. We'll see how the media reports. I wonder which side they'll end up picking. Now, I want to explain a couple of things about the recent events that are taking place, Gaza, Israel. Now, as you know, after October the 7th, one of the first world leaders to get to Israel was Joe Biden. He, in fact, literally met and physically hugged Benjamin Netanyahu. He apparently, in other meetings, said, look, it's okay that you respond, just don't go too far. But much of the centre-left governments around the world say that Israel has gone too far. Of course, the red line being currently their movements into the most southern parts of Gaza as they're making their way through to a place called Rafah. Now, again, I'm just bouncing over some of the history here. Please don't send my homework to the principal. But interestingly, Joe Biden turned around and said, after these events started to take place, because remember, essentially in Gaza, you know, the whole top half had been hit. So people were told, move south, move south, move south, and about 1 million people are right now in the tippy bottom of the south, but they think that there's Hamas there as well. So Joe Biden went on television last week and said, we're going to keep sending you guns and bullets, but we're not going to send you the massive bombs that could just destroy from the air. You're going to have to go house to house to deal with this one. And a lot of people have tried to work out how and why has the United States gone from hugging Netanyahu to now warning Netanyahu. And if you think it's because of the protests on college campuses, you would be wrong. Because the reality is that for a certain section of voters, yes, mainly young, but certainly further left-wing voters who voted for Biden in 2020, the issue of what is happening between Israel and Palestine is an issue that they say they are willing to move their vote. It may not go directly to Trump, but they may well just up and not vote for Biden. If that happens, Biden would definitely lose, which is why he has gone from hugging to redlining Israel. Now, important to note in this is the CNN facts, because the CNN facts are going to tell you that when it comes to people who support Biden's handling of the situation, most of them will vote for him again in 2024. But for the Democratic voters who voted for him last time, if they disagree with what he's been doing in terms of Israel and Palestine, they won't vote for him, and thus he will lose.
So if you like Biden on the Israel-Gaza war, look at that. He's getting 87% of the vote. RFK Jr. is getting 8%. Donald Trump way down here at 4%. But if you dislike Biden, if you disapprove of the job he's doing on the Israel-Gaza war, look at this. He's getting just 50% of that vote. My goodness gracious. These are people who voted for him last time. RFK Jr. is getting 20%. This is just a 30-point margin compared to a 79-point margin among those who approve of Biden on the Israel-Gaza war. This is a huge dividing line within the Democratic Party, and that's something, of course, we're seeing right now between the progressive wing and those more centrist or mainstream Democrats.
Which is why Joe Biden is in part trying to bring an end to all of this, regardless of whether he should or he shouldn't, or he should have a long time ago. He's now claiming that there could be a ceasefire as early as tomorrow. We'll all find out. We'll report back by this time tomorrow. Meantime, Trump was allowed out of the courtroom for just a couple of days, because that's what happens. The only time he can campaign is effectively on the weekends. He was in New Jersey, a state where the Republicans almost won the governorship, but essentially Republicans don't win there. It's a blue state, but apparently 100,000 people turned up. 100,000 people turned up to see Trump. And of course, they were particularly fired up about his experiences that he's been having in that courtroom in New York, a courtroom that, of course, is supposed to be about paperwork, but it's been so much about a whole bunch of other garbage. But anyway, here's what the crowd think of what's happening to Trump in the courtroom just across the river. Meantime, last week the media was excited about every little detail that Stormy Daniels had to say. Now remember, the case against him is not did he or did he not sleep with Stormy Daniels. That's irrelevant. The case against him is about whether the non-disclosure agreement, the hush money, which is not illegal either, not that it was made or not whether she was happy with it or not, but about how it was accounted for in the books of the Trump organisation. And surprisingly, a person who hates Trump with every fibre of his being, who has seen the reality that Biden is too old but will still vote for him because he ain't Donald Trump, comedian Bill Maher, was one of the very few on the left to actually point out that last week was not as good as lefties thought it was. For all of the salacious and silly information that they got, it didn't actually move the ball forward on the paperwork case.
But you say it's not a Me Too case.
It is not a Me Too case. I mean, I wasn't assaulted. I wasn't attacked or raped or coerced or blackmailed. They tried to shove me in the Me Too box to further their own agenda. And first of all, I didn't want any part of that because it's not the truth, and I'm not a victim in that regard.
That's not what she's saying now. She's talking about he was bigger and blocking the way. It's all the Me Too buzzwords. She said there was a power imbalance of power, for sure. My hands were shaking so hard. She said she blacked out. Blacked out? She's a porn star.
So that's the point, is that the defence's ability to come back against her is to say, well, hang on, she said this, she said this, she said this, now she's saying this, she's saying this, she's saying this. If you're sitting around in a jury, well, then it makes you go, oh, yeah, probably, okay, wipe what she had to say, back to the paperwork. But because all of the paperwork stuff happened before Stormy Daniels turns up, what's the most recent thing you think about before you go into the jury room? Now, again, it's New York. They'll most likely find him guilty. But if it was anywhere else, he'd be 100% correct that the salacious stuff from Stormy Daniels in the past few days was very different than what she was saying. This was after she'd apparently slept with Trump, after he became the president. And you can see that if the story gets changed when you're in a courtroom versus what you're willing to say when you're not under oath, it may well end up working in the former president's favour. Anyway, we'll all wait and see. His former lawyer, Michael Cohen, is going to be first up on Monday in the United States, and the media will, of course, go nuts. And one other thing, just about the overall coverage. If, like me, in Australia, you're sitting up in the middle of the night, you're watching how granular this thing goes, hour by hour, witness by witness. Every TV channel that's talking about this only talks to prosecutors to help interpret what's happening inside the courtroom. Now, I understand that they all hate Trump. They all want him to be found guilty. They'd all love him to go to jail because if he goes to jail, fingers crossed, he doesn't become president. But you've got to have defence attorneys somewhere on television explaining what the potential response to the prosecution case is. Otherwise, you're just getting a version of state TV with a whole bunch of people absolutely agreeing with what the prosecution, who of course represents the government, in this case the state of New York, is saying. So I understand Trump derangement syndrome means they think they should only cover it in one way. But justice is supposed to be blind, and therefore you're allowed to hear from defence analysts on television, not just the people who say he's guilty, he's always been guilty, and today nothing changed. No sooks, no lefties. As I say, this Sunday night, wherever you happen to be, and let's help you decode the budget BS before it actually takes place. No sooks, no lefties. Happy Mother's Day. Love you guys. We'll see you in a moment or two's time here on Paul Murray. Thank you very much for watching, wherever you happen to be. All right, let's get into it right now with none other than Nicole Flint, who is the Liberal-endorsed candidate for the seat of Boothby and the best option at the next election if you're voting in that seat. Lovely to see you, my friend.
Great to see you too.
James Ashby, the best option on the ballot in the seat of Yabun at the upcoming Queensland election. Back him in if you're in that part of Australia. Lovely to see you, sir.
Good to see you too, Paul, and happy Mother's Day to my mum and my two grandmothers, that's Val and Anne, and a big thank you as well to all the mothers who've given up their time to look after my grandfather who's in Dove House in Caloundra. It'll be his last show tonight as well, Paul. You'll lose an audience member, I'm afraid.
Oh, but, mate, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm really
he's
sorry.
Wonderful grandfather.
Oh, strength and love to the whole family,
he's lived
mate.
91 good years.
Good stuff, good stuff. Well, strength and love. I appreciate the support from him and the family in general. And Christy McSweeney, well, she was absolutely the best option on the ballot paper at last year, the 2022 election. So we can all go back in a time machine there. In the meantime, you can go say good day to her at the PR Council. Lovely to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Now, yes, exactly. Now I'm completely impartial.
Yeah. All right. So I've got to say, I giggle every year in the lead up to the budget because I remember the types of people, and when I first started doing them a little while ago, you know, when all the wankers get together and they all go, oh, it's like sitting our HSC again. No, it's not. They all sit around. They're basically handed a whole bunch of press releases. Then they all go and copy each other's homework over 7 hours. And then, surprise, surprise, everyone comes out with tax windfall. It's only after normal people outside of the bubble get the chance to look at it and go, hang on, $35 a week? Best case scenario, $35 a week, and then reality starts to set in. But I want a little bit of a BS guide here, okay? James, what is a tip you'd like to give the good people watching right now about the type of BS bingo that we should be playing on budget night, not just in the speech, but the coverage and the spin as well?
Well, sadly, when you go into a lockup, the Labor Party's talking points are already being delivered outside while you're locked away for several hours, and you don't get to get out until I think it's around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So just before the Treasurer himself delivers his wonderful speech. Oh. Yes, it's only a few days later, but the problem is the media have reported all the glossy good stuff, and so it's hard then to cut through all that positive spin that the Labor Party just continue to dribble out every single day. Just they're so good at delivering. They should be salespeople. Peter Foster, eat your heart out. You should have been part of the Labor Party, not a con man on the Gold Coast.
Now, Nicole, again, you've seen plenty. Ones you've liked, ones you haven't liked. But still, again, what's the advice you have for normal people about, OK, when they're saying this, they really mean that?
Paul, the clearest message I can send to all of our viewers at home tonight is that you might as well just ignore whatever Labor is saying. What you need to think about is, are you better off after this budget? And unfortunately, the Australian people won't be. So as Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor has been out saying, you know, all week and particularly today, Labor's spending is growing faster than our economy. So things can't get better, inflation won't come down, and cost of living won't come down. And certainly power prices won't come down, and they've ruled out a cut to fuel excise. So I just encourage everyone at home, whatever spin comes out from Labor tomorrow and in the course of this week, just ask yourselves, are you better off? And I note that I'm wearing Labor red tonight because Labor has the budget and has the nation deeply in the red, and we have to get rid of them.
I'd also like someone somewhere, right, to start asking questions about off-budget money. Like, I'd like somebody somewhere to be able to start to come together and say, this is how much, because there's all the stuff they're going to report and put the documents and this, that and the other. But then there's, like, hundreds of billions of dollars that sit off to the side because it's infrastructure building. But guess what? It's all still borrowed money. It's just not money they have to own up to. But also, Christy, I just find infuriating when government turns around and says, we are delivering a $108 billion tax cut. Well, of course, that's just the overall number times the next 10 years. The reality is, when they turn around and say, you will be $600 a year better off, divide it by 12 to get the months, divide by 52 to work out the weeks, and then you'll go, what?
Look, the government will say cost of living relief, and they've flagged that there are cost of living relief. The truth of that is read targeted. So if you're a punter sitting at home and you're hearing the government saying, we're going to help you pay your bills, we're economic managers better than the last people that were in, we are managing the economy, we are going to help Australians through this cost of living crisis, that means only a very, very small percentage of people are going to get about $10 to $15 a week extra. A lot of these are loaded into policy areas where the government feels that they have got a firm ground to stand on against the opposition. We're going to see a lot of these targeted reliefs moved into things like childcare policy. So not everybody out there is going to get anything at all or any help whatsoever paying their bills.
Yeah, I mean, just the petrol thing, right? I mean, I bang on about it all the time because I just think it is a multifaceted tax that people pay, and obviously the more you travel, the more fuel, the more you pay. But, I mean, literally the person living in their car pays this tax, all right, all the way through to the person who's using it for commercial reasons. James, why are they so pig-headed in not making this decision? Because to me, the politics is pretty obvious, right? Where you can say to the widest number of people, here is the win. Is it because if they've got a $10, $15 billion surplus that they need the fuel taxes to get to a surplus, and that's why they're not doing it? Because to me, it seems absolutely politically stupid not to deliver something that everyone would benefit from.
Well, if they did discount it the way that Scott Morrison and the Coalition did those years ago, they would effectively lose about $12 billion a year if they took 22 cents off a litre. So it's about $1 billion a month that they'll sacrifice. Now, the problem is, though, these governments have a spending issue. They don't have a revenue collection issue because, on average, across this country, all governments collectively collect $2 billion worth of taxes every single day. 365 days a year, $2 billion a single day. Now, where's that money going? Well, it's been sent overseas. Look at Ukraine. We've given $960 million to Ukraine. We've given millions of dollars towards this new scheme. They're paying super for those people within the public service who take time off to go and have kids. You know, there's another $600 million. Everything we do, everything we hand money over to PNG, we want to go and build them new stadiums over there for their football teams. And it's just, the money isn't being spent correctly. So we don't have a revenue problem in this country. We've got a spending problem. And if we get that spending pared back, we can actually cut the taxes that we are charging every single person in this country. And, you know, the cost of living matter. If you have a look at the way that food prices are going, I was talking to JBS Meats here at Beef Week last week. Do you know meat prices, they say the supermarket meat prices are so high, yet the cattle prices come down. The problem is JBS in one of their abattoirs is paying $80,000 a day for power and water.
Wow.
That's where all these costs are coming from, Paul. It's extraordinary. The governments are just squeezing the life out of businesses who then pass that on to the end consumer. We're all paying for it. So your little piddly little tax break you claim you're going to give us is going to go nowhere.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point. Now, Nicole, this new form of polling, which doesn't necessarily say how would you vote at the next election, instead it sort of tries to get inside the head of people about has your attitude changed on the government, is there a sense of buyer's remorse, where is it going? It claims that about 27% of Labor voters who voted for them at the last election wouldn't vote at the next. Now, that vote has been replaced by some others, so essentially the primary is just a little lower than where it was now. But that's a big churn in a first-term government. Obviously, as a person who would like to see some of that to be true, for you to be returned to the parliament, but more importantly, a bad government to get rolled over, do you get any sense of that? Not necessarily buyer's remorse, but they've had their chance, and we don't care if it's 3 years. There is a percentage of people that are willing to go back.
Look, Paul, as we always say, the only poll that actually matters is the one on election day, whenever that may be. Let's assume March 2025. But what is not changing is that Labor's primary vote is disastrously bad. So I think the key message here, regardless of how the numbers might move around from poll to poll, is that a vote for the Greens is a vote for Labor, and really sort of vice versa. So I really encourage viewers, if they have any family members, because I know none of our viewers would ever flirt with voting Labor, let alone the Greens. But if they have family members who might be thinking about that... There's a few who hate watch. It all counts in the ratings, I don't care. But sure. Okay. Well, but I'm sure that's probably a small number. They're just keeping an eye on what they think we're up to. The critical thing when it comes to Labor's vote being so disastrously low, and the fact that they keep falling over the line and forming government, and we just saw it here in South Australia with the Dunstan by-election, is that a vote for the Greens is a vote for Labor. So people need to be very careful about where they're, not our wonderful viewers, but friends and family who might be flirting with doing that, are putting their vote, and please persuade them not to.
Christy, do you get a sense that the people who have tuned out of the government are being replaced by people that are impressed by the government, or they're people that are just moving into the great pile of undecided? Because if they're undecided, then they're up for grabs. We've seen statistically how One Nation has been improving on plenty of national polls, so it's not that it's all about teal voting here.
No, it's not. It's certainly a drift to minor parties, and a huge load of minor parties as well. What's interesting here is that this is a huge sample. It's a poll of 2,000 people. Now, if we compare that to a news poll's 1,500. So if the news poll's the gold standard, this is even bigger. 27% of people have decided to change their vote against the government. However, 8% of those are going coalition and 8% to the Greens. And herein lies the rub. The government is desperate to avoid minority government. Now, with 8% of those voters going across to the Greens, we're about to see a fracturing of the Labor-Greens preferences, particularly here in Melbourne. Seats like Macnamara are almost 29% Green, 29% Labor, and the Liberals polled 29% too. It's only Greens' preferences that helped Labor win that seat. And there's a couple of others, seats like Wills here in Melbourne as well, where the minor party vote polls about 7-8%. That's two socialist parties, United Australia, Animal Justice, a whole range of them. So people moving away from the government isn't necessarily going to benefit the coalition. But it is going to see this fracturing of Labor and the Greens. Those Labor seats are up for grabs, and the Greens have them in their sights.
James, you've been around for a while. I say that as a compliment, which means you've seen middle of term before. You've seen people come and say, oh, mate, I'm all in on you guys. I'm ready to jump. I'm all in. And then it sort of returns to form. Are you seeing anything that feels different than the previous times that people have come up to you as an obvious part of One Nation in particular to say, mate, I'm all in on you? Do you see something different?
I think the biggest issue at the moment with a lot of voters out there is they don't see much faith in the two major parties. Nicole will probably disagree with me on this, and I'm happy for her to do it. But look, this is just feedback that I get from people who were previously coalition voters. They don't know what the coalition honestly stands for. There's turmoil here in Queensland with them. They don't, there's left factions and right factions in every party. I get that, but to see where the coalition have moved away from their conservative roots in a lot of ways. Like here in Queensland, for example, they voted for treaty. Now, that's not what the coalition have previously stood for, but they actively voted for it. And they actively voted just last month to lock in net zero as a legislative measure here in Queensland. Again, not typically what the coalition will do. So there are a lot of Conservative voters that are saying, guys, you're playing small target in this state. You're passing legislation with Labor that goes against the grain of what farmers want, what the average person in regional Queensland wants. And we've had a gutful of you because you're deceitful to our face. You tell us one thing, and when you get on the floor of Parliament, you do the opposite. So that's why a lot of people are migrating across to minor parties like One Nation.
All right, Nicole, you may respond, but after the break, because we want people to support the businesses that support us so we can keep the lights on. And as we know, that costs more and more under this mob each and every day. See it all? More to see. How could I have sent you to the wrong website for Humpty Dumpty and the Humpty Dumpty Foundation for Mother's Day? It is humpty.org.au. I'm so sorry to Paul Francis and the whole team. I love you guys very much. It is humpty.org.au. Please donate what you can because the gear saves lives. And on Mother's Day, it's a beautiful extra little gift that I have no doubt Mum will not mind that you're a day late with. Humpty.org.au. All right, here with, of course, James Ashby, with Christy McSweeney and with Nicole Flint. Nicole, give me the 30-second response to our chat just prior to the break where the Liberal Party doesn't stand for anything anymore, according to James.
Well, look, I'll leave Queensland state politics to James, but I do note my dear friend and our dear friend here at Sky, Amanda Stoker, is running for a state seat. There is no stronger, more principled woman and candidate than Amanda Stoker, and also Peter Dutton. And I know we've got a lot of Liberal voters coming back to us because Peter is incredibly strong and principled, and people know that he will be a strong leader who keeps us safe and gets the economy back on track.
There is an endless fight about housing and about what type of housing needs to be built, particularly, obviously, units is really going to be the fashion of how we're going to get to where we need to go because of the endless Ponzi scheme of population. But there's a specific complaint which has been launched up in Sydney, which is really interesting to me, which is most units aren't big enough for families. 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, maybe stretched to 3, but you go anything more than that, then you basically have to buy the penthouse. Christy, I think this is an excellent point as we talk about the need for more housing, is that the housing has to be big enough for people who are singles or couples with multiple children.
Yes, of course. And this is all bound up in who has decision-making power of planning laws. State governments set the size of apartments, but then, say, for example, the City of Sydney can come in and say, well, if you put in EV chargers or bike racks or you allow go-get or car share car bays, we'll give you extra concessions on the size of apartments and the area that you build. And so there's all these sorts of things. There's not only a debate of how big these houses have to be or these units or apartments, but where. And they're not big enough for families at all. And if we want people to live in these affordable and social housing that governments are seeking to build, although who knows when the states and the federal government are ever going to come to an agreement on how that's going to work. Apparently that's in the budget too. We're reducing cost of living burden on renters by building more housing, which is the same agreement we struck with the states last year that still hasn't started. So it is a really, really difficult policy area, but no, they're not big enough. Not big enough at all.
All right, let's get to a bold prediction. James Ashby, what's definitely happening this week?
Oh, we're not going to get any promises of power cuts, that's for sure, in this budget. That's not going to happen. Look, it's going to be another tedious, long week, full of lies, spin, but by next weekend, I'm sure the truth will start to come out about this budget.
Well, and it will start 9:30 budget night right here on Paul Murray Live. Nicole Flint, your bold prediction?
Oh, look, I don't think we'll see anything announced that will bring cost of living pressures for individuals, households, families, and particularly small businesses down. And I don't think it will have any impact on getting inflation under control either.
Christy?
Oscar season for political dorks, except there's not much in the gift bags, Paul, this year. If you're in the green energy lobby, you're going to be very happy. If you're anybody else, probably not.
That's one red carpet I'm more than happy to avoid. Thank you, guys. Do appreciate it all. One and all. Do appreciate it. Talk to you all again very soon. All right, quick break, back with more. Looking forward to the Royal Report in a couple of minutes' time. Lots of big issues to deal with them. Caroline up in a moment or two's time. That's our show for tonight. One more time, happy Mother's Day. Love you, and we'll see you tomorrow night.